The Small Business Administration has proposed two important rule changes for federal contractors. One has to do with popular mentor-protege partnerships. It seems to stem from the popularity of these arrangements. Maybe the government thinks they're too successful. We get some analysis now from attorney Shane McCall, a partner at Koprince McCall Pottroff. Mr. McCall, good to have you with us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
And mentor-protege is a very popular way for small businesses to get into federal contracting. In fact, if I'm correct, even the mentor can be a small business, but one is smaller than the other. Just give us the outlines of what the program to begin with is all about, and then we'll get into the rule changes.
Sure. Well, there's different mentor-protege programs for different federal agencies. We focus a lot in our practice on the Small Business Administration's mentor-protege program. Currently, there's close to 2,000 approved mentor-proteges on SBA's list, so it is definitely very popular. And it, like you said, it's open. It's mainly larger businesses that are mentors, but it doesn't have to be. And they have various items of assistance that they help a less experienced company with as the protege. And if they do it under SBA's program, they sort of have the blessing of SBA, and they get some advantages of that. Chief among them are they get an affiliation exception, meaning if the mentor is providing some assistance to a small business, that assistance that's approved under the mentor-protege agreement does not form the basis of affiliation. So it's kind of an insulation from risk that a lot of companies really appreciate that. And then one other big benefit is a large business and small business can form a joint venture if they have an approved mentor-protege agreement, and then that joint venture qualifies as a small business or an 8A or SDVOSB service disabled if the protege company meets those requirements.
Right, so a protege can't just ride along and do nothing, nor can it do all the work, because then it's the old camel's nose in the tent idea. So what does SBA want to change? From my reading of what you've written, it looks as if they're trying to get more fine-grained ability to evaluate proteges.
Yeah, it seems to be giving a little more guidance to the agencies when the agency is evaluating the past performance of the joint venture. Usually in a mentor-protege, you get the two joint venture parties. So evaluating kind of, okay, who can have more experience, who can have less experience. And it used to currently the rule basically says the agency may consider the past performance, experience, and other qualifications of each joint venture party. So it just kind of says may consider. And SBA discovered through some court cases that left a little too much leeway up to the agencies, or at least that's how SBA views it. And so they want to provide some more details and guidance to the agencies when evaluating past performance and similar type metrics. So they got that example, and I looked at this, and honestly, I think it's a little confusing, but the example they give to provide this detail talks about the dollar value, the specific dollar values. So the agency may require the protege to have one or two contracts valued at $10 million or $8 million for a certain kind of a hypothetical solicitation, but can't require the protege to have 5 contracts and can't require the protege to have contracts valued at $20 million. In that example, basically it's saying the protege can't be required to have the same level of projects as the mentor would have. So that was kind of the understanding from a lot of GAO decisions and Court of Federal Claims decisions, and now SBA is kind of putting their spin on it, so it's clear. Yeah, it has to be smaller. Now, what I found confusing is, are they saying it literally has to be less than 50%? Is that example saying that, or is it just saying it can be $1 less, and we're just giving an example? I think SBA hopefully could make that a little clearer, or maybe they don't want to hamstring the agencies, and they're just saying it has to be less. And if you use this example, then you're doing what SBA suggests you should do.
But essentially, it sounds like, well, two things. One, they wouldn't say that if some agencies hadn't been doing it and somebody complained about it. But it's also a way of, I guess, ensuring that the protege on this new contract that I'm awarding, that protege has also done similar work at all, and therefore we'll look at how they did on a smaller size contract so we know they can do any work whatsoever.
Exactly. Yeah, I think SBA is saying there has to be some level of experience from the protege, but it can't be required to be the same exact value as the more experienced company. So yeah, they are trying to make that balance between,
Sure.
Okay, there has to be some experience, but it can't be required to be as significant as the mentor. So how do they make that balance? So that I think that example is trying to get at that that sort of tug of war between some experience but not too much experience, kind of a Goldilocks type scenario.
We're speaking with Shane McCall. He's a partner at the law firm Koprince McCall Pottroff, and this is proposed at this point, but it sounds like it's something that they felt agencies were doing wrong or overdoing, maybe, in evaluating the protégés, essentially.
Yeah, and I will say some of the parts of the rules suggest that the agency, in some cases, doesn't have to require protégé experience, and that's acceptable. So then they're kind of going. That's why I find it a bit confusing that they're saying if they require the protégé to have experience, it can't be the same level as the mentor. It can't be held to that same standard.
Right. Otherwise, it's not really a protégé at that point.
Right. Exactly.
It ought not to be a protégé. You can't have Accenture a protégé to Booz Allen or something, to make an absurd example.
Yeah.
And that's
in that language. Yeah. That again. It says a procuring activity has discretion whether to require the protégé to demonstrate some level of past performance. In my mind, if they say discretion, that can mean zero. So that it actually does a little bit contrast with how some of the decisions have interpreted that rule, which they said, okay,
sure.
But it's still they still want to leave that discretion up to the agency.
Well, I'm glad you're also confused about it, because that gives solace to the rest of us. And that's not the only mentor-protégé rule change that SBA is contemplating.
Yeah, there are some smaller ones in this proposed rule, and there's so this proposed rule kind of is talking about the HubZone program, but it mentions a lot of other small business programs. SBA is also kind of in general asking for input about kind of the entirety of mentor-protégé joint venture concept, but they haven't really. They've signaled they have sort of questions about it, and they've indicated there's some scheduled talks, kind of discussion periods, and they want to hear from people about. I guess they're asking the question: are too many awards going to mentor-protégé joint ventures?
Yeah, so this has been coming up. This has kind of been the drumbeat lately. It sounds like the whole idea of mentor-protégé is becoming a little suspicious.
That's what SBA is suggesting, which kind of came as a surprise to a lot of us in the federal contract industry, because SBA promotes the mentor-protégé program very, very heavily. So it's interesting that they're questioning kind of, did we go too far? Is our program too broad or something like that? But they haven't given many specifics about what they would propose to change it.
And what's their timeline for commenting on these things?
Well, at this point, I haven't seen any proposed rules on kind of the broader question, and I know they're having discussion sessions this fall, so I would think they would come up with something. It might not be until next year.
So they're floating balloons at this point.
Right. Yes, and they've mentioned it in, there was a notice about kind of a tribal discussion, and they mentioned it in that notice. So their SBA is putting the questions out in different notices that they send out. And then this rule that we talked about at the beginning, this proposed rule, those comments are due October 7th on the joint venture past performance issue. And then the other mentor-protégé aspects of that one are kind of more clarifying and clean up to the mentor-protégé program. For instance, the SBA had come out a couple years ago in different settings, such as in conferences, and said that you can have the same mentor twice in a row. And then they clarified that in their rule to make that clear. And now they're concerned that people think that would somehow allow more than a 12-year period of mentor-protégé relationship. So they're cleaning that up. They're saying that a mentor has to be a for-profit business as well. So there's some little clarifications, but those are going to just make things clearer for mentors and protégés.
Lots to keep an eye on. Shane McCall is a partner at the law firm Koprince McCall Pottroff. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. Great talking to you.
We'll post this interview along with a link to his blog on mentor-protégé at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Friday, Shane returns with analysis of an even bigger rule change having to do with HubZone contracting. Hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.